when we say about why did the GAA, like who are the GAA, like it is some person in a back office was told to organise this, so it's either that's to me, because there's no cost behind it. It's not a cost saving thing,
No.
What would you do? Maybe give 2 more dinners, maybe, if you're giving a dinner up there. There's no reason why you wouldn't bring him other than it was someone's fault or somebody made a mistake and left it out.
Yeah.
Unless the picture came out, they wanted that picture for Sunday morning when it would have worked. But
yeah.
That's very unlikely too.
Hello, and welcome to the Hurling Show. We're joined in studio this week again by our very good friend of the show at this stage, James Ryall. Good to have you, James. How are you getting on?
Very well, thank you.
Good. And great friend, not of the show, but certainly of me, of a long time. We were just chatting outside, and from the time we were 5 or 6 up until 32 or 3, I suppose. Eoin Quigley up from Cork, but most definitely formerly of Wexford, 12ster. It's great to have you in studio, man. How are you doing?
Thanks, Giz. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for that introduction.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's great. Like, sure. I mean, this is the thing. You get to coming up from West Kerry, like, and we chatted about it before. I want to be. Yeah, there's certain people I want to be chatting to about the game, because they're people who I've chatted to for a long time about it, and or for a short time, but I've been interested in them, and I mean, you definitely fall into that category. How's life in Cork?
Life is good in Cork. Things are nice and busy. Kids, family, hurling.
The lilt is coming in, isn't it? Do you hear the bit of Cork there? Do you hear the bit of accent coming in? Surprised.
That's 10 years in the making, maybe a little bit more. So it's definitely creeping in. I'm getting a good slagging back in Wexford when I go home. All right, there's a couple of Cork words being thrown in lingo. So I
was talking to Adrian Fenlon at the weekend at the Wexford Kerry game, and he said there's a fella who went down, and I say he was down from Enniscorthy, thick Scalder accent on him, and he was in Cork 6 weeks, and he came back up and he had this Cork accent. I said, yeah, they get to everybody eventually down there, like.
They do. I actually saw you beside Adrian at the match.
Yeah.
10 years older than you, but he looked fairly fresh beside you.
Yeah. He looks good beside me. He's like, it's interesting meeting Fenno. Like, he's still so involved with Wexford hurling, kind of behind the scenes now. But when I meet him, it's like I'm always meeting the hero of our youth. Like, he was whatever, I was 14 or 15, I suppose, in 96, and he was working actually in the bank at the time with my mother in AIB in Wexford and or in Enniscorthy, and so we kind of got in a couple of times to see him, like, and sure, geez, it was like meeting a god, like. So it's hard to distance. It's hard. I still find it hard almost to distance. I have to kind of recalibrate myself and say, right, this is just another fella in front of you, like, just be normal, like. But you're also looking at Fento, like, the fucking sidelines, and you're just thinking, yeah, it's just great to be chatting to him about the game.
Yeah, but I think when you're growing up as a young lad and you have someone like that and they're your hero, it always stays that way. And I think Fenno is one of those kind of guys, and he's so respected in Wexford. When you meet him, like, you're nearly in awe of him, and you think about what we learned playing hurling with him, especially with ground hurling. Like, he'd take the legs off a guy if the ball was there, and it was something that stood out with me after a first training session. But he's a great guy, and he's doing a great job there in Wexford and referees.
Is it like that? Is it like that in Kilkenny? Like, is it like, I don't know? It's when lads have fibres, like, that's as someone, who was it? Tom Humphreys or someone said it to him one day, like the famous Wexford 1-0 team. In Kilkenny, you're talking about fellas with 5 or 6 All-Irelands, and there could be fellas with 2 or 3 All-Irelands, and you mightn't bat an eyelid, or but the fact that you've won 5 or 6 yourself, like, do you still, like, when you meet the fellas of, the heroes of the 70s or the 80s, or those kinds of, I remember meeting Fan Larkin one time, like, my God, like, just you would be in awe meeting him. Like, I don't know what it's like for you fellas.
Yeah, I think some of the guys that you are playing with, you kind of get so used to them, you kind of forget that they're maybe, I suppose, heroes when you're talking to them. But then when you move away, I was only maybe retired a year or two, and then all these guys, they come up an awful lot more nearly in your, I won't say in your estimation, but you're so used to them when you're hurling with them that I think you become nearly in awe of them again then when you're a supporter for a couple of years and you're looking at them. So, but look, you'll still,
like, of the fellas who will say when you finished, who were still playing,
exactly,
when you come away from it.
Do you know, like, so the likes of TJ would have been starting out with me, or, but you take even the likes of Henry, who would have played on for 3 or 4 years. You'll still look at those guys in awe when you're gone, and whereas it was never a case when you were hurling with him. It was just the normal. You were looking at lads 3 or 4 times a week, maybe 100 times a year. You were getting sick of looking at him. But it came to a case in where you actually would cross the road maybe to see him because you wanted to say, I know him. And now when you have kids coming along, the same thing again. You have kids who want to go out and sign autographs in fields after games, and it's a whole new cycle that I'm involved in now.
Yeah.
But we never got to play that long with Fenno.
No.
For instance, Adrian Fenno, I think we only played with him maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
But like John Power now, older John Power, these guys, you would have probably gone up looking at them.
I think it was my first training session or first or second training session in Nolan Park, and I remember DJ just came over and shook hands with me and says, "Hi, I'm DJ Carey," and he goes, "Yeah, I know who you are." I've watched a bit of hurling, and so yeah, like I joined in 02, and it was actually midway through 02. So a lot of those guys, I'd say John Power finished up, so it was only maybe a half a year maybe with the likes of the John Powers. DJ was maybe, I think it was maybe the end of 03 or 04. But I'd still see John Power. He'd be Callan. He'd be neighbouring parish. And
God, he seems like the most down to earth, nicest fella who was as hard as nails on the field. My God.
Yeah, he comes across very very mild, and he is, But put a hurl into his hand and and a slitter somewhere, and he's probably a different. But that's what makes great hurlers, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we watched. I suppose him and Liam Dunn had serious battles between Wexford and Kerry when we were growing up.
Yeah, and John Power was strong in the air, and Liam Dunn was strong in the air as well.
Yeah.
So there was
in a different way.
Yeah, in a different way.
I remember actually finishing up training after one training session, and obviously Cody was there at the latter stages, but the hurling game had finished, and maybe it was going into a running, and I remember John Power just running across, and he kind of waved up to Cody, and he just says, "Hey, I'm going feeding calves," and hopped into the Jeep and tipped off. But even throughout Cody's era, I think that the professionalism has gone up more and more and more, and we've kind of gone away from that type hurler who'd just be able to come and do it. It's gone to a very physical state now, I think, but that's a whole new.
Yeah, it's a whole other. It's a whole other thing, definitely. Because sometimes you just wonder about the loss of the fellas who can't do it in terms of time. Like they don't have, or it could be commitment too. Like they're not willing maybe to give up 7 days a week to it. Like they'll give up 4, which is reasonable for something you're interested in outside of like your work and your family. 4 days is pretty reasonable. But now it's gone to 6 or 7 days a week. So it's like, who loses? What kind of characters are we losing out who aren't willing just to do the 7 days a week and dedicate their whole lives to it? Like there is also brilliant, different style of hurlers, but maybe they just wouldn't survive. I don't know.
But characters with unbelievable ability, and we're kind of weeding that out a small bit, I think. And I see it in club hurling. Some of the greatest club teams we have. Of course, there's Ballyhale who are producing forward after forward, but a lot of really good club teams mightn't be bringing through the brilliant forwards, whereas they're isolated in different smaller clubs around. And I think it's a case of numbers. And if you bring a whole heap of numbers together, you'll pick the bigger at underage.
Yeah. And,
they're there then throughout development squads, through underage teams up along. And maybe the small little dandy hurler with loads of ability, great vision and ability to take a score, they're often maybe late bloomers, and they can be kind of left to one side, and you could be missing some of those hurlers. So
sometimes it seems like because you do see it in games, there might be 2 points in it, or there might be a point up, and the statistics all say 21-yard free, tap it over the bar, and then you'd be always thinking in your head like of a Paul Flynn, who'd say, tap that over the bar, you're 35 yards out on the right hand side, and there's no chance of a goal, but he's thinking something completely different. And now the adherence to the statistics, which say that's a 1 in 100 shot, so don't go for it. But sometimes when you're in like the magic of a Munster final or of a Leinster final, and it's all boiling down to this, this potential moment that we're just playing. It's almost always now play the statistics, as opposed to like, well, maybe there's a bit of genius in the magic of this moment that I can just. I can go for it, and it adds something to the game when there's the possibility that it doesn't have to happen, but I want to know that there's a possibility that it might happen, because it keeps me more interested, as opposed to we're just going to play the stats here, But
I think there are magical players out there, and we've had them in the past, and it takes a certain type of person to be willing to do it. There's probably guidance coming from the line that they want you to put it over the bar. But then you come across the likes of a Flynn or possibly like a Joe Canning, TJ Reid.
They'll defy the guidance. Like,
because they believe in themselves, they have that ability to do it and they stick it in the back of the net. But I think it's a good point. We're probably losing a lot of players to different vocations as well. And you go down through the list of players and all the teams and you see a lot of college students, you see a lot of teachers. Like, I wonder the days of guys doing the hard labour, the masonry work, that kind of stuff. It's very hard to come out of that kind of work and then go into the gym or go in and put in a heavy slog at 2-3 hours of training and then get up next morning again at 7 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning and go off again, maybe driving to Dublin. So it's hard.
I often thought that with Red Barry, and I think it's a similar argument for the masons or the builders, whatever. It's like, well, I think a Darren Stamp off the top of my head straight away is like, well, do you need to be in the gym? Because he's shuttering concrete all day. Like, it's like, why do you need to be in the gym? And there came in a culture when it went to 4, 5, 6, 7 days a week where lads were saying, and if you remember in 2005, I think Red Barry played hurling and football. And we played Kilkenny actually in the league in Nolan Park one day, and he came after a football match, came up, played the football, and then went on to Nolan Park, and he was brought on, ahead of 8 subs, who were all saying, well, he was only with us 2 days this week. He was with the footballers the other 2 when he's already after playing a game. And this was like, this isn't fair. And I was thinking, well, hang on there now. What are you doing in your other 2 sessions that week? Like, why is he better? Like, how can he be better than you? And why are you blaming him only being there 2 days? Or why are you saying it's not fair, he's not here every day? If he's better than you, like, what's the criticism? Like, if you're missing gym sessions, should it be 100% regimented? Everybody has to be there all the time because that's what a panel does, or can you make allowances for what fellas actually do outside the game?
Yeah, but I think Red Barry in particular was probably one of the last dual players for Wexford, and we spoke about that bit of magic, and Red Barry kind of has that bit of magic, and he came on that day in Nolan Park and he actually played quite well. He's actually probably one of the best players we had when he came on after already playing football. But yeah, and he's the kind of guy who actually didn't do a whole lot of gym work, but then Darren Stamp on the opposite side would have been as strong as a horse, doing masonry work all day long. Came into the gym anyway, but he probably didn't need to. He probably would have been better off getting a bit of a rest and being fresh for the training sessions. But I think it's a valid point that, I mean, we don't see the dual players anymore. But the likes of a Spark from a Redmond Barry, can create those goal chances or go for the goals, go for the 21s instead of tapping the ball over the bar. Yeah.
You'd always love watching those players.
Yeah.
Kerry, I suppose the 2 games at the weekend, the first thing was probably in the build-up to it was around the photo call. I don't know, did you put much stock in it? I don't want to give it any great time in some respects because I think that there was something in the week before for the Kerry and Antrim lads where they had the photo call for the Joe McDonagh final, but still in all, like, if you're talking about, if everybody's having this conversation about, well, how do we promote games in the county, it seems pretty basic. Like, bring them to the photo call, whether you think they should be there or not, bring them up to it, because I mean, why wouldn't you?
You answered yourself there where you said I don't want to give it much time. I don't think anyone in Croke Park gave it a whole lot of time either, and that was the problem. I don't think it was a malicious move. I just think it was someone didn't really think it through, and somebody made a call on it without any great, I suppose, understanding of what they were doing. Yeah. And I bet you it just comes down to one person. And like when we say about why did the GAA, like who are the GAA, it is some person in a back office was told to organise this, so it's either. That's, to me, because there's no cost behind it. It's not a cost-saving thing,
No.
What would you do? Maybe give 2 more dinners, maybe, if you were giving a dinner up there. There's no reason why you wouldn't bring him other than it was someone's fault or somebody made a mistake and left it out. Yeah. Unless the picture came out, they wanted that picture for Sunday morning when it would have worked. But that's very unlikely too.
Yeah. I think that's enough on it. It left a sour taste for Kerry and Antrim, no doubt. Kerry brought whether they brought it. I don't put too much stock in that. So that's one for the dressing room wall or whatever. I don't think that's how the game really works so much anymore. With certain things, maybe there's something in that, but I don't think. Coming from headquarters, it's not like the Wexford lads decided that the Kerry lads shouldn't be in it or anything. So there's nothing you can say like that. That's Wexford's fault or anything like that. So I don't know that it carry much weight into the game. But Kerry certainly started strong and started with a bit of an edge. Like
you'd be surprised. I think like just finishing off that point, I think they would probably be quite hurt by not being in that photograph. And I think like there's a lot of good club people down in Kerry who put in a lot of time in the North Kerry clubs. I think the youngsters looking at the paper, maybe seeing that photo, would have loved to seen the Kerry jersey there.
Yeah.
As like that doesn't happen too often. Like, it would have been great to see it, and I'm sure it was used as ammunition probably in the dressing room for both Antrim and Kerry at some stage. But the Kerry Wexford game, like obviously Wexford started quite strong. They had obviously had a little bit of hiccup against Westmeath in that they got the draw. They were expected to get the win. They were coming down to play Kerry in Tralee. I said Darry Egan had them well versed. They started quite strong. They looked well up for it. I mean, the Kerry boys were putting in hard tackles, but the Wexford lads were matching it all the way. Obviously got into a strong lead of 5 points, and obviously a couple of points from Lee Chin. So it was good to get a start of that, but wasn't it great to see Kerry then coming back at them and having the strength of, I suppose, will and mindset to get themselves back into the game after 20 minutes. And look, they were 10 points down against Antrim in the Joe McDonagh final, and they got themselves back into it again. So you have to give them great credit for the resilience there. But obviously Wexford kicked on then for the remainder of the first half and had a commanding lead at half time. But again, look, it was a great opportunity for Wexford to put a second good performance in a row after beating Kilkenny. Sorry, James, bringing that up so early. Well, after beating
They're
Kilkenny,
sitting in an Ireland semi-final, they're not too pushed.
but then kicking on and just, I mean, was it a worthless exercise in ways where if they win, they're expected to get that victory? If they don't win it comprehensively, But at the same time, I think they've gained things from it, and that obviously Chin was very sharp on frees, and that's really important because over the previous years we haven't been that good with our free taking, and if you're going to be a top class team and actually get to the final, compete in semi-finals, you have to nail those frees, and Chin is back and he did the business. So there's some good positives there.
Rory O'Connor back on song. He was back in that kind of just that little bit of magic above everybody else on the field, I thought.
Yeah, and like what impressed me as well is Rory O'Connor's work rate. There was a great clip of him back in like a corner back tackling at one stage, and he has the fitness and the energy and the speed, the hurling brain to get back up the pitch to get himself into positions then where he's knocking, I think, nearly 1-4 from play. But it's great to see him back on fire, and like looking forward to obviously the Clare game which is coming up. He's going to need to be on fire to beat them. But look, he's a great player. We know him from the club in St. Martin's. He comes from a great family. He has a bit of steel to him as well, which I really like about him. He'll take the knocks.
Why'd you say he'll need it?
You need it.
You need
not
it.
He, yeah.
Well, it was hilarious actually. My brother, I got to go to watch the game with my father. He came down from Wexford, any excuse to get down to Kerry, and he came down, and my brother Davey was there as well, and he said he was chatting to Sean, one of the selectors after the game, or maybe during it, he had said to the linesman, Rory was getting a little bit of hardship. Now he was down a couple of times. He shipped a couple of heavy belts for sure, but you'd expect him to move on with it. Like nothing like you'd have seen between Clare and Limerick in many respects. And he went over to the linesman and he said, he was telling Davey this after the game, he said, I went over and said, like, are you going to do anything about, is he going to be protected at all? Like, is he going to do anything about the number 8 there who's on Rory's back there for the whole first half? And he was like, he was a Clare man, and he said, well, he's going to need a lot better protection because he's going to be in Clare next week and he's going to get twice as hard. So I'm not going to say a word, to be honest. And it was kind of the way it is. Like, I think when you go up against Clare and Limerick at the level they played the Munster final at, that type of attention is just going to be, Rory O'Connor's just going to have to expect it and deal with it. James. I'm going to go in between the two.
No, sorry, yeah. No, you will at this stage, and I think Wexford, I suppose, are probably in a good place. That'd be my view on it. I think coming out of the provincial losses on the two teams, that can be nearly a tougher place. You see that in the football. I think all the 4 provincial losers have lost at the weekend there. So losing, Wexford's probably lowest point was coming into Kilkenny in Nolan Park. Yeah. That was when the year looked to be nearly done and dusted, and that was the pressure point. And Wexford came out that day and performed. And I won't say they're in bonus territory now, but if you had gone back the week before the Kilkenny game, you probably would have been looking at that and saying, what's the story here? Where are we going? Our things, we had a great league. The championship kind of dipped off. It looks like we need a lot of things to go right for us today, and it happened. So I think they're coming into next weekend's game in a superb position. And I think Clare had so much, as you called it, intensity in the Limerick game. That was such a whirlwind of a game to try and turn around again and come back out and try and get your mind up for that again. That's, I won't say an impossible task, but that is really, really hard. And
I was surprised Lohan said that after the game. For someone who's who emanates such solidity generally, everything is kind of the next game and it's all positive, and not in the positive psychology of everything being great in the camp or anything, but just very practical, and we get up for next week and that's it. And he was saying after, the only thing maybe he said of note after the game was it's going to be hard to get up after that again. And I was surprised at that.
It will be very hard, and they always say that the performance after your best performance is a very tough performance to put together, and there was such a, the round robin was whatever the round robin was in Leinster and Munster, but the reward for winning a provincial final was going straight to a semi-final and bypassing quarter-finals and dogfights and different venues. The rest as much as anything as well, I think. And the rest, which is massive. And I think that's one thing Kilkenny will benefit from is the rest. They need a bit of hurling as well. Some guys maybe just back from injury. But you put Everton on the line, you go to Thurles trying to win a Munster final, you're playing your neighbours, the form, the attitude, everyone in the whole of Limerick and Clare is just, it's 100%. And then you come along 2 weeks later and you have to play Wexford, which is more important because your championship is on the line. But is it more important? Can you get to that 100% again pitch? And I don't think so. And and you'll see games like that where you could have Wexford absolutely hit the ground running and build up a bit of a lead. And that's what happens in those games. But it's going to be a dogfight.
But I'm just thinking back to Brian Lohan there, isn't it great? And it shows great leadership and management by him that he's identifying that so quickly after the game. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for where he's brought Clare to over the last couple of years. And he's obviously chatting to the players about this, that you've put in a massive performance now in the Munster final. Obviously they didn't come out on the right side of the result. They're going to be very disappointed. There's extra things going on the sideline which we'll probably chat about later, but there's going to be a huge opportunity too for them to bounce back now and continue their year along the way they have been going, because they've been excellent all year. But look, I think Wexford did what they needed to do down in Tralee. I think they were very impressive in the second half, completely took over the game. Some great performances, especially Matt Hanlon actually as well in the back line. Ran up the pitch, created a beautiful overlap for a goal. It's just great to see some form coming back into himself as well. We saw Damien Rex. So I think Wexford are in the long grass for Clare. Like you talked about coming into the Kilkenny game, they'd been beaten by Dublin, of course, in Wexford Park. They were very lucky to get a draw against Galway. Galway should have won that game. We got the last 2 points.
And terrible performance.
A draw against Westmeath. And then we come, and obviously we bet Laois, and we come and we bounce into Kilkenny then, and there's just no fear of this Kilkenny team from these Wexford boys at the moment. And then they backed it up with a performance down in Kerry. So Wexford are motoring on nicely now at the right time of the year, so we'd be hopeful.
There's great opportunity for Clare, Wexford or Kilkenny, one of those three, to arrive in an All-Ireland final. It's a massive opportunity. And you're going on how brilliant the Munster Championship is, it really shoget Clare, shouldn't it?
I mean, it's a done deal. It's a done deal. There's a few things in there. I'll just go through them because I do want to get back to Kerry for a second. Damien Reck at centre back, I think I think he only came onto a lot of people's radars for that double save actually against Kilkenny. But I think he's one of the top players in the game at the moment, top defenders in the game. He's an absolute leader of the Wexford backline in particular, and I can see by the body language. So beneficial to be at the games because you see the small things in how the lads around him are relating to him, and he has this no nonsense kind of eye on the prize kind of attitude. He has that teak toughness. I think it's a great point about Lohan, because one of the things when you have like something staring in the face and it's problematic, we often kind of tiptoe around it, and what he did was called it out, and often by calling it out you just bring it to the surface straight away, and then you know that it's there, and then you can kind of deal with it and move past it, as opposed to letting it rumble on. For Kerry, the call, there was criticisms, I suppose, about the structure in terms of bringing Kerry into the Munster Championship. Is that a step too far at this point for them?
I suppose, look, when you look at the performances, and they've put in a good year in the Joe McDonagh, and they had a cracking final against Antrim in Croke Park. Obviously they got pipped by a point, and it was a controversial free as well that Antrim probably won the game with.
Yeah.
The man slipped and they gave the free. But they played Wexford then, and the end result was a 21-point defeat in their own backyard. They obviously put in a big effort the week before. I'm just thinking about putting them into the Munster Championship, and they're playing like the Limerick, Clare, Tip, Waterford, like away from their home, right, up in Tip or down in Waterford, and God, in the round robin series as well, is going to be back-to-back matches nearly every weekend. And would Kerry be actually ready for that at this point? I don't feel they are. I think they're doing tremendous work down there, and isn't it great to see Kerry hurling, shown on TV and a bit more excitement about it? But I think it's just maybe a couple of years too early for them. I think they just have to believe it can happen for them and keep knuckling down and working hard, keep this team together and building it. Mullumfy's a good guy, we know him from playing against him. He can build something down there if he's able to stay on. So I think right now is probably a couple of years too quickly for them.
Yeah.
But with their eye on the prize, it can be a reality. But they need help from the GA probably as well to do that.
They do, but it's like everyone. I've seen the last 20 minutes of the McDonagh final or so, and the one thing you'd say, it was kind of loose hurling. You could see where a goal had come from.
Yeah.
There were some brilliant catches, there were some brilliant scores, some brilliant strikes, but didn't have that intensity. But unless you're exposed to that, then how can you get there? So there has to be an element, whether that's in a league format or whether it's in a Munster Championship. But I think every team you take. Was it Jerry Keegan of Kildare in here a couple of weeks ago, and they were exposed to a higher level in league hurling, and then when they hit the Christie ring, they were right for it and they got the results. And the Joe McDonagh is becoming a serious competition now, and it's there's a lot to it. There's a lot of teams that are performing very well, but there has to be a prize to say that we can compete at Liam McCarthy level after it, for the team to make the breakthrough. Of course it's going to be hard, but exposures like you take Westmeath Monday morning, waking up in Westmeath after drawing with Wexford. I'll give you one back. But that would have been, they're great moments. And until, I suppose, the Kerrys and the Antrims play the Wexfords and the Kilkennys and the Corks, and that's more exposure, and that's when the level, I think, will start rising. That's when more kids will get involved. That's when people become more important in the sport, and it has to come within the county at all ages, I think.
Yeah, there was definitely a feeling of that in Austin Stacks Park afterwards. Like, I thought because of the way Wexford pulled away in the second half, you'd be like, there's people at the game who mightn't be at hurling games very often, and there was loads of kids in the roster onto the field afterwards, and they're up to the likes of Leachin and everything else. It was great to have them down in Tralee, no doubt about it. And you've got places like Tralee, Parnells who are trying to build from the ground up, like with a view to being somewhere in 10 years' time, and that's only good. I suppose at the protocol is in some respects an example of it. I think that the likes of Kerry and Westmeath are kind of already maybe on track. Antrim are a couple of years down the road ahead of them. I think they're wasting their time waiting for anybody else, for Croke Park to intervene or to send funding their way or to invite them to protocols. I think they need to take the kind of the Limerick attitude. And I'm not saying you can get to a Limerick level because their base is so far ahead, but taking the Limerick attitude, which is, I don't care what you think, I don't care what the GA community think of us, I don't care if we're the darlings of the GA or not, we're doing it our way, whether you like it or not, we're doing it this way, and we're not going to apologise for it. And I think Kerry the likes of Kerry have to take that attitude to it. It's like, this is the way we're doing it, follow a vision, and then for them to come in and row in behind it together. Now, I think that's more difficult in counties where the playing population is focused in a small area, where you'd have had it with Wexford in the 70s. Your dad often talked about it, John, between like the Rathnure, Buffers Alley and Owler. They would have been the top three, and there was vicious games in club matches. And then when they came into the county setup, they weren't really able to gel together, and he reckoned they'd have won a couple of more All-Irelands if they'd have been able to gel, but they weren't. And so I think for a vision like that to manifest itself, they have to really come in together and kind of work together for Kerry hurling. If that's going to be the aim, a strong Northern Kerry, hurling championship is maybe fine for them. I don't know, but until I think you take that attitude of like we're not waiting. Like I think it was a thing. I don't know if it's disrespectful. I hope it's not. But I felt that with the ladies football and the camogie, like there was a lot of talk for 5 or 6 years about well it was probably 15 or 16 years then. Why aren't we getting more exposure? Why aren't we getting more big days in Croke Park and everything else? It was like, well, look at maybe when more women go to games, maybe when more young girls start going to games, maybe when you start filling stands for games, then more investment will come. And I think that's exactly what they did it themselves, and they started going to the games, and then all of a sudden you've got the likes of a Lidl on board, and all of a sudden they're in ads and they're adding to the whole thing themselves. They're not waiting on handouts from anybody else. I think it's the only way forward for them, and I think they're at Stephen Mullumphy is ideally placed to bring them to a certain point, but then it'll have to be from within the structures of the counties themselves to push it on.
It will, and the weekend being showcased in that, like, you know, so many different hurling people from all over were watching that game because it was Wexford and Kerry, and the same with the likes of Antrim and Cork. Do you know, people, we won't call them influencers in hurling, but that type of, you know, the more people that see it, the more people, journalists are writing about it, the more people that are talking about it, it makes the game, I suppose, better and more interested for the player himself, so that when they're kind of thinking about coming back next year and saying, God, am I going back to the same thing again, or is there something we could build to? Could we actually get on and maybe perform better, or is there a way for us to get into a stage, to go to Croke Park, to get it at a televised game, to play against the best? Do you know, because there's lads there and they're every bit as good as any hurler, and they say, I want to go out and I want to mark the TJ Reeds and I want to mark the Lee Chins and I want to try and hold these lads scoreless, and that creates, you know, a great feeling, I suppose, within themselves, within their club.
And that's what you want to be part of, isn't it? It's a great feeling, is kind of what you're excited. Like people think like it's the all of the medals and stuff like that. Like, and that's all, Ginny, like it's not that you'd be turning it away, but if you're part of something that's going somewhere, it was really interesting reading about Antrim actually, where they were 2 or 3 years ago versus where they are now, in terms of like a tip man coming in with the structure that he was used to, or the experiences that he had and what he demanded, and where the description of where it had been, of fellas kind of almost being optional to come, and then he was just like, right, that's the end of that. And all of a sudden then there was a vision, and there hadn't been a vision before that, and once there was a vision, then you either bought into it or you didn't, and there was nobody you weren't going pour mouth and saying, oh, you know, we Antrim hurling needs you now because you've done well for less. Like, well, look, here's the vision, do you want to be part of it or don't you? And it's like, you're not apologetic about it. You're not like, oh geez, will you come in? It's like, no, this is it. And then once they all bought into it, they've started really going somewhere. And now I'd say Antrim are getting back to the point of where they probably were a few years ago, like because they had a serious lull, like, but now it's back on a good track.
But isn't it great to see like Dan Gleeson doing that, because he doesn't have, I suppose, the huge depth of players available to him that some other counties do, but yet he's given them the ultimatum: do you want to get involved? Come on. If not, step aside. And I heard a good comment during the week about somebody saying that it kind of once in a decade a very, very strong team comes out of some of the counties, like we're talking about Antrim, Kerry, Westmeath, Carlow, etc., to have a very good group of players, but it also takes a very strong management team to bring it all together, to get the structure right, to get the training right, to get the feel in the camp right, and the bond. And he seems to have done that at the moment, and obviously they've had a very good successful rate in the last couple of years in the Joe McDonagh Cup, and
they really turned up at the weekend too,
big time.
Point up at half time. You know, Cork people had to sit forward, and you know, everyone was sitting forward and saying, you know, what's going to happen here. So they really performed. It was brilliant.
One of the points, just before we leave it, I want to go on to the Antrim Cork game, get the insight on what's happening in Cork from Eoin. But John Keenan was refereed the game in Limerick Clare, which was far more physical, but much less freeze. There was really poor flow to the Wexford Kerry game, and Johnny Murphy was refereeing it, and he was coming under fire. But looking at the game, I would have said, like, that's not fair on the referee here at all. Is the standard of tackling was atrocious. Like, there were a lot of silly frees given away, and now look at there definitely was an awful lot let go in some respects in the Clare Limerick game, but they're the things that you can kind of do at the right time in the right spirit, that like Darragh Ryan, you never had to look too far. Like Darragh Ryan, you know, the referee wouldn't blow against him because it just seemed to be in the right spirit. Tommy was a great one for it as well. It seemed to be in the right spirit at the moment, that he was okay. It was a foul, but it was on the edge, and the play was developing, and you see what he was doing, and it's a bit reckless, but it's not too bad. Like, he wasn't really, you know, whereas these are like pulls, like it's just stupid things at stupid times. I don't know the referee can do anything about that. If they're stupid frees, they're stupid frees, you know.
But I think the bigger issue with the referees is that a player can make a hit in one game and it plays on. He can make the exact same hit in another game and he's getting a yellow card. Yeah. And you know, the Munster final was probably the best game we've seen the last couple of years. The intensity and the hits, especially the first 5 minutes, was incredible. They were just hopping off each other, but it was fair and there was an honesty to it. But then that referee was scrutinised amongst his peers for letting too much go and missing some of the big moments in the game. And this would have happened, I suppose, in the week after that Munster final. Okay, so then Johnny Murphy goes into this meeting and he sees the way he's meant to be refereeing it. He's told from the top, this is the way we want you to referee it, and all of a sudden there's a lot more yellow cards being handed out in the first half of the Wexford game. So unfortunately, from a spectacle, I mean, we're not going to see a game like the Munster final again this year, I don't feel, because the top table are starting to, I suppose, make sure that the play isn't as intense, there's not as many hits going in. But from a spectator point of view, it's not good news, because we love those type of games, and that's why we turn around at the end of a game and go, that was one of the best games I've ever seen, and this is the game we love, and this is why the best sport in the world. But I think going forward, even if Clare and Limerick get to an All-Ireland final, I don't think we'll see that type of a match again, unfortunately. But
it's hard to know. Like it's the same point as with Paul Flynn in some respects. It's like you want a referee who's willing to defy the central council referees who are saying you have to pick all of these things up, and they're saying, well, look, I'm gonna be a slave to the crowd here, I'm gonna let this go. And also in a game like in an All-Ireland final, we'll say, if you're talking about Clare and Limerick or Kilkenny and Limerick or whoever it is, if something develops in the game, like when a game develops a particular type of life force, like it wasn't in the Kilkenny Galway game, it wasn't in the Wexford, it hasn't been in these other games, but in that game, it was like the pure spirit of hurling came through, and the referee just had to kind of stand back because he was in the pure spirit of it too. It's not like, I don't think he's defying it, it's just like that's the energy of the day. Like, I don't know, that's how I think about it, but maybe that doesn't make sense on a technical level, you know.
And we want that, of course, as spectators and supporters, but unfortunately the referees have been given a direction in which way to referee the games, and I think we probably need to be a bit more mindful of that too as supporters. Like, I go back to your dad there and the roar comes from the crowd, oh, come on ref, will you, you know, what are you blowing that for? But he's blown it because he's been basically told to blow it from the panel who are actually looking at the way they're refereeing the games and the moments they're missing, instead of just letting the flow and the energy happen the way we want it.
It's the consistency, and it's the one thing that drives every hurling supporter and player wrong, and that consistency, you know. Like if we take the black card, even, you know, there is a black card in hurling, but we haven't seen it in the Liam McCarthy yet, and we won't see it. So
was there one in Munster? I saw one recently, I thought, because I remember being surprised to see it.
There was one in the Joe McDonagh final.
And the Joe McDonagh final.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Antrim got a goal, and it's I suppose it's not proportion to, you know, a harmless enough free ends up in 14 men for 10 minutes and a penalty. Like, it's a double whammy. Like, one is nearly bad enough, but both of them, and like, there has been none. So we can't say that none of those have happened in the Liam McCarthy. Why is it only happening in the Joe McDonagh or the Christy Ring? And they're numerous. If you filter down through talking to anyone involved in those teams, they're happening all over. But there has been none, as far as I'm aware, in the Liam McCarthy, and I guarantee you there won't be any going forward. And
there's somebody else to look up those statistics for you anyway, but you just trot out the facts, and somebody else will back it up.
There's no one here going to correct me on it. but it's the and it goes back into the referees. Like, at times the ref is listening to someone in the ear, which isn't an umpire. It's coming from the higher stations above, and we've seen that. I won't go back to I will mention it, the Richie Hogan sending off.
You still haven't let that one go. Yeah, go on.
That was a clear coming from the stand, because you can even see he was the Wexford ref, was he? James Owens. Yeah, you can see him. He's standing in beside the linesman, and he's listening, and he's turning up, and he's looking up, and you can hear him listening. And a couple of moments pass. It seems like a long time, and then he comes in and he makes his decision. So, like, that's okay, but does that only happen at certain times of the year? Is, you know,
in certain stadiums,
who's there looking it on? Who is this person up there that's looking down at this? There's no. It doesn't make any sense to me, and that's the infuriating thing. So if you went back to, I watched Take the Stamp on Richie Reid, and Gerard Canning, I think, was commenting. He goes, "Does that look like a stamp?" you know. And
Yeah.
So I'm just picturing your man above, like, is he gone for a cup of tea at this stage, or is he watching the Sky Sports? But you know, I mean, why couldn't he say it? You know.
And would you bring that? Would you bring that
I wouldn't.
technical analysis in straight away? I like it being done after the fact, I think, but I'd also pick up diving. I'd also pick up fellas faking moments like that too. But when it's done, I'm glad that people are picked up afterwards, because I think they should.
Yeah.
But in the moment, I don't know. Like,
I'm wholly on the player side, and you know, okay, you might say look at a stamp and you'd say, right, there's no need for that, or you know what I mean. You can't say anything, but you know, the one I think with Hayes where he kind of bangs and he bangs the second time, like your man is holding, like, so. You know, if a lad is holding you and you thump him once and he still holds you, you thump him harder. You know, that's what you do, like. And you know, if a lad comes in,
wait now, not with Rory Hayes and Flanagan down in the corner that time. I mean, he wasn't being held. He just tomahawked him. Like, I mean, he
was being held, in my view.
Yeah, he was being held.
Initially.
He was being held, and he was trying to break free. Yes, I know, but you go back to the box. The Limerick boys have to take great credit here, in my view, for not rolling around or not standing up and just...
I mean, Flanagan was unbelievable. He took a full belt in the back and just jogged out like as if nothing happened to him.
Like, the only time you should go down is if you get a hurl into the face or an eye and it you know, it affects you, and automatically you put your hand to your head and you go down. You know,
if you're injured, you go down.
If you're injured, you go down, or you're tripped, you go down. You can't stay on your feet.
That was the problem with the Hegarty one, really, wasn't it? It was like going down for no reason is not. Yeah, it's not. Shouldn't. I don't think it's not a welcome part of the game.
No, and if you have to look back, but I don't think we should be going through the cameras and you know, if you're trialing guys, like, what good is it after 20 minutes in an Ireland final, a guy pulls a stroke and then they look at it 2 days after and he gets a 2-match suspension and he's after being, you know, it's no good to the game. Like, it's. I think it's harsh on that side of it. I know. Like, if a ball goes over the bar or wide and it's in a non-hawk eye venue, we'll say, to score it, no matter if it's a blatant point and it looks to be a blatant point after, it doesn't change the result of the match. So looking back at lads, I think I'd be against it on that side.
Yeah.
I think looking back on those instances we're just discussing now, obviously, in my opinion, there was actually 2 frees into Clare. I'm talking about the Peter Duggan incident where he's tangled up with Sean Finn.
So he's been held on the way in by Sean Finn.
He's been held on the way in, yeah. And I think if the ref had blown the whistle there, awarded the free in, you know, that jab at her probably wouldn't have happened. And the same then with Rory Hayes, I feel. He's obviously been held. His left arm has been caught by Flanagan. He's trying to get out to tackle, I think it's Darren Gillan. And we know of players, there's nothing more frustrating than if someone's holding you up and you're trying to get out and you can't.
Yeah.
And obviously... Rory Hayes given a small jab to start with just to kind of loosen it maybe, and then the hand hasn't been loosened, so the next minute he's after going a bit harder, and it's obviously striking with the hurl then at that stage. But I think if the referee had pulled those 2 frees and blown that whistle, those 2 instances wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't be in this situation with Clare lads.
But what's the protocol, I'd like to know? Like, you know, is there people sitting down today looking at the 2 games at the weekend for incidents that happened in it? Is that protocol there? We don't know that. It's
This is the point of the trial. Is it trial by Sunday game? Is it because the Sunday game focusing, like, is that the trial venue, or a Crow looking back at the games and saying, right, these are things that are missed? And also on the point of Sean Finn, you can look back at that one and say, why didn't the referee blow it there? But I'd say if you looked at that camera for the whole game of every time Duggan and Sean Finn were coming in, how many times has he been held? Is it just this one time where Duggan finally lashes out, or is it happening all the time?
Yeah, and you know, it's not the Sunday Game's fault for highlighting it. It's the GAA's fault if they look at it and say, "Oh God, we made a deal on this now because there's people talking about it." Like, is that the way it's been done? So if no one talks about an incident this weekend, do you know, like, if we sit here and we harp on about something that happened, do you know, could we generate something on social media that will create enough of chaos that the GAA are going to sit down and start giving suspensions out? So, like, that's a crazy...
It needs to be fair and balanced, I suppose, whichever way they're working it. It does set a dangerous enough precedent going forward that, you know, are they going to look through every match throughout every Munster Championship, Leinster Championship, and see if they can pick something up? Is there a spectator going to catch something on the phone and throw it up on social media? Next minute he's tagging in the Sunday Game, and he's tagging in Joe, and he's tagging in, you know, different sports bodies and stuff, and people.
If that's the case, then you'll have county boards bringing their own cameras to games and focusing in on players, and then waiting until the incident happens that maybe someone is affected on their team, sending the this around on social media or into the GAA and getting it done that way. And that's not how it should be done in my view.
Yeah.
So
I see there's a problem in it in being reactive, any organisation. And big organisations tend to be maybe a little bit reactive at times anyway, because they're big and maybe a little bit cumbersome and slower because of their size. But I don't have a great problem, I have to say, with trial by the GAA public, because it's not the GAA, as you said. Who are the GAA? Are the fellas in the room looking at the cameras, or is that not the opportunity that we have, is to say, well, this is happening in the game. Like, you know, there's diving coming into the game, and you're someone who played the game very honestly, and you say, well, look, I don't like that development in the game, and I'm part of the GA, and I have the very same rights to comment on it as the CCCCC and the president and whoever else is, because we're all one in it. So we are all entitled to say it, and then whatever's picked up is picked up. And I don't know, like, the reactiveness, you'd like something, you know, direct coming from the source, but you are responding to what is being put there as well in front of you. Say, well, there is that thing, and that did happen, and that is coming in as a cultural development in the game, and maybe we should move away from it and focus in on nullifying it in some way. And I think they do have to kind of work that way a bit, you know.
They do, and I think they kind of have to come out and say that, look, yeah, every day we sit down after every game and review every single incident, and if we think it needs to be brought, but that statement hasn't really been made, or if it is, I'm not aware of it. That, you know, have to know, does it happen?
But isn't it an eye-opener too for the players to know now that this could be potentially happening going forward? And unfortunately, it looks like the two Clare lads are going to end up being potentially the guinea pigs of what's coming down the line. I don't know if that's fair or not, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Cork on up in Antrim. Antrim were coming in definitely much stronger than Kerry came into the Wexford game. There's no doubt about that. I know they only beat them by a point, but the momentum has been building, and Gleeson has been building something for a couple of years, and he had a strong base to work with for sure. Cork were coming off the back of their renaissance, and you know, they were written off as dead and gone a few weeks ago, and then things turn around for them, and all of a sudden there's a bit of the Cork swagger is back. I'm wondering how deep that runs. I doubt how deep it runs, I suppose, is my point. But maybe it's not. Maybe they're developing nicely, and Galway is the ideal stepping stone on to something greater. I wonder. I don't know in terms of performance against Antrim, because I didn't see enough of it. But
I mean, look, I think the first thing to say is going up north to play Antrim is actually quite a difficult task in itself. We've went up twice that I know of and been bet.
We did.
Probably not you, James. You probably never. Don't know if you ever played up there.
Once, I think, yeah.
But so I think Cork would have been very focused on this game, knowing exactly what they're going to get up in Antrim, up in Corrigan Park. Antrim have been playing that bit better, and actually watching again that Joe McDonagh final, they're very fluid in the way they play. Like, they play the ball through the lines, they do this off the shoulder run, they let go ball into their forward line. They have very good forwards and so, but there's a bit of steel to them as well. So I think Cork would have been very aware of what they were getting themselves into up there. I think they would have been very focused. They've made small tweaks to the way they're playing. You know, at the start of the league or of the Championship Round Robin series, they were kind of playing the ball around too much in the back line, trying to get that ball into Mark Coleman's hand, who was then going to deliver this absolutely perfect pass to a Cork forward. Okay, and the Cork forwards weren't moving much because they didn't know when Coleman was going to actually strike it in, because they were just overdoing it. Now they seem to let the ball in a lot quicker into the forward line, and it's working out a lot better. I do think there's a good culture starting to build in that team. I know the club scene is strong in Cork. They have a lot of players from different clubs in the county team, not just senior clubs either. You know, they have intermediate players, etc. It's a good mix, and they have some very strong forwards, especially like Robbie O'Flynn and Conor Lehan, who's come into a huge amount of form kind of over the last year, including last year's club championship where he's man of the match in the final. So I think there's definitely momentum in Cork at the right time. So, you know, they have a great chance.
I like often to put things, I suppose, through the prism of what Brian Cody talked about an awful lot with you fellas, which is the spirit of Kilkenny hurling, which is always and still is exceptionally clear above anything else. Tactics and everything else maybe not so clear sometimes, but the spirit's always very clear. I was talking to a Cork man, Neil Hegarty, last night, and we were chatting about it, and he started talking about as Cork, sometimes as Cork peoples want to talk about the Cork spirit, and he was talking about the depth of spirit that's there at the moment. And I felt as he was talking about it and I was thinking about what he was saying, I was thinking, well, when they were pushed hard, like the whole GA population were almost rounding on him and saying, like, look, what is wrong with Cork? Like, I mean, they couldn't be any worse. It's was septic hurling to look at, and criticism was from within the county and everything else. Then they happened on that spark of like what Neil described as the Christie ring in all Cork hurlers. Like that's there's something, not looking back to the style of the 50s, just whatever you can tune into as a Cork hurler, the same as you were as a Wexford hurler, the same you were as a Kenny hurler. My criticism of them, I suppose, and my question about them coming into the Galway game is it's fine to tune into that when you're under the cosh because you've nowhere else really to go. But can you tune into it when that's the option in front of you? Can you choose it without having to be backed into the corner of it? You know, like everything has, you know, if a robin flies in your door and you go to catch him, like he'll go to peck you because there's a fight in every animal if they're cornered. But can they choose it initially? They don't seem to be choosing it without the onslaught of criticism against them. So I wonder how deep that, where they're at the moment, and how they fare then, or how they're looking for the Galway game, who I actually think Galway are well suited for Cork to be a stepping stone for them.
Yeah, well look, I think your question about the spirit in that can only really be answered by themselves in the Galway game. I suppose if you think about last year, they're in the All-Ireland final now, and they got beat very well by Limerick, but they aren't a bad team. They have been building under Kingston there for a while, and they have a lot of under-21 success under Pat Ryan as well coming through. So they have a nice team building. There's a bit of freshness, a lot of speed, and obviously really good hurlers. But the question is then, do they have that steel and that courage and self-belief to really drive on, not just when their backs are against the ropes, but every game they come into. And I think they're starting to learn that and build that as a team. And I think the game against Galway will give them an opportunity. Hopefully, I would hope now to go out and express themselves and fight for every single ball and bring that toughness in defence, especially because they have the forwards, there's no doubt about that, to actually prove that point, essentially. Yeah.
How do you see that going, James, Galway Cork?
Galway are very physical, so, you know, to go back to your robin, you want your robin coming up and pecking them on the shoulder before they get caught, basically.
Yeah.
And you know, can they do that? You know, I'm not sure either on Cork. I'm fancying Galway a small bit. And,
I used to tip Waterford. You know, Tipper and disarray. Waterford fell apart. I mean, they're two big wins that turned their season. But what have they turned on? I mean, they had to draw it out for sure against Antrim. But
if Antrim had a
3-week
break from a Joe McDonagh Cup,
like 1 week in for both teams was tough going.
After winning it and the highs of that, and then to come out and like they competed with them for so long. So who knows what would have happened after that? Do you know, there was, I think Keenan Malloy came, he scored a right few points, but he came through at one stage and he was flicking balls over, I think he flicked it over Rob Downey's head even, and the size of him, but just the confidence there. But that goes both ways. On the Rob Downey side of things, you should, do you know, it's the one time I think in hurling where you should be allowed nearly deck a lad is if a lad tries to flick it over your head. It's the only time I think.
Well, Yaron Jr. Huh? Yaron Jr.
I think there's actually.
I feel like there's a story here. Have you done it?
No. Well, I think there's a.
I tell you, I can remember a fella flicking the ball over a fella's head out in. We out in Abu Dhabi, and one of at the time we played Connacht. Do you want to? Do you remember that? Do you remember that training session?
It involved me, no.
Henry Shefflin in midfield, and Eoin went soloing up the field. Now we'd been in Dubai the night before till 2 or 3 in the morning, I think, and I thought the best thing to do, as I always thought, if I had a bit of a hangover for it might only be a club game, and everybody think, right, keep everything just brass tacks simple here, because nothing's functioning very well. And there's a few of us, I think Jackie Tyrrell and a couple more, were kind of staying out around the sideline, but Owen decided this was the time to bring out the big play, and he went soloing straight for Henry Shefflin on the first ball that he got. He went to flick it over his head, but sure, he misread the distance as happens in those situations, and went to flick it over his head, but flicked it straight into his hand and ran out the far side, and sure, Shefflin was gone down the other side of him. So I think you get what comes to you when you try that trick, like.
Yeah. Well, look, sometimes the genius comes out in you when you're a small bit hungover.
I think there's a guy in Offaly actually called Pancakes it happened to him one day, and they nicknamed him Pancakes. Someone flicked the ball over his head, so I think that stuck with him. But I've always said that, you know, any guy even trained that as a defender, it's a horrible place to be if a lad pulls it off. And you know, a few times I train, a lad might do it, and I'd nearly always just grab him and just, like, you'd be trying to say, don't try that in a game.
Him, and that's the last time you'll try it.
Yeah, so, it's the next one you kind of take him on it, isn't it?
But look, how will Cork stand up? That's going to be the test. I think Galway, and again, going back to my earlier point about losing the Leinster final, losing the Munster final, those teams having a 2-week turnaround.
Yeah.
that was... Both those two teams are after coming from, I suppose, a previous downer, shall we say, where they came into a game, they were looking to try and win the provincial final. It didn't happen. And they have to try and pick themselves up now, whereas the Cork and Wexford, to be fair, are kind of coming in pretty much on the crest of a wave in some sense. And I know you might say Kerry and Antrim, but they're coming in at the right time. Their hurt has been probably 6, 7, 8 weeks ago.
Yeah,
so,
and the momentum has kind of steadied.
The momentum, So they're in a great place, and they're nearly, I won't say bonus territory, but they're there in a position now where an All-Ireland semi-final is so easy at grasp. And I think... we could see two very close games.
It's a difficult one to call the Galway Cork game because they're two good teams on their day, and they can be two poor teams on their day as well. Like Galway can be excellent and strong, physical, very strong at pumping ball in fast and quick and very physical in the air, well able to catch ball, and then Cork can work the ball out and put ball into their fast forward.
It's the analysis of the hurling which was probably lacking in some, like the analysis around the Leinster final was nearly more on the two managers as regards the actual individual hurlers. So we talk about the Munster final being an epic, and it was atmosphere, packed, Clare, Limerick, rivals,
tradition,
sideline cuts from, like I was just thinking, if you got that sideline, if that was if you were brought on a sub, never played inter-county before, took that sideline, levelled the Munster final and just waltzed off again.
Dropped the hurl,
just dropped the hurl
out into the stand.
Be a statue of you.
Yeah.
You would be remembered, wouldn't you? So it had so many of those moments, but when you get into the actual hurling of who will be marking who and say, right, do Cork have a guy to mark Conor Whelan, and he's on brilliant form. Like, I think Hugh Lawler, who I thought was exceptional on the day, even though Conor Whelan played well and scored a few points, if we didn't have Hugh Lawler playing, we wouldn't have won the Leinster final.
Yeah,
that's the importance of it.
So back there,
do Cork have a full back now to go out and stop Conor Whelan?
It's the full back line to be, you'd wonder.
And I think we'll see scores, I think we'll see goals, and definitely see physicality from the Galway side of things, and we will definitely see, and I know it has to happen at some stage, but after this game you'll really see our Cork, it'll answer your question, I suppose, Gizzy.
Yeah. Well, Whelan, I mean, he's one of the top forwards in the game. He's after growing so much too and getting so strong, and obviously Robert Downey's been playing full back for Cork, and it didn't work out for him last year in the All-Ireland final, but he was really exposed by the half backline going so far out.
Yeah.
And they just took the Cork full backline to the cleaners, and they seem to be way better structured this year. So, I mean, I don't know now, will he start in full back again? I think they should play him there because I think he probably is the best answer to have. Is he going to be able to hold Whelan? I don't think there's too many.
Whelan's first point against Kilkenny, and I know on the weekend was the Munster Leinster final, was absolutely phenomenal. And his pick up after that for maybe his second or third point. Mid-chest.
Well, he's like Tony Kelly, like he's unstoppable when he's on form. Really, it's just about the supply in. Really, that's where it's at.
But there's a conversation in Cork which kind of hasn't really hit the national media. I don't think as such is about Patrick Horgan, and are they going to start Patrick Horgan? And if they start him, how long is he going to last? And what's the reasons for not playing him?
Or do you use him as an impact sub?
And what a hurler to be bringing into a game. I mean, he's wristy, still has a bit of pace there. He's just a top class hurler, one of the best I've ever seen. But they didn't start him against Antrim. It'd be very interesting to see now, do they actually start him in against Galway, or do they bring him in as that impact sub? Because he doesn't want to be an impact sub, I'm sure of that.
The minute I heard that, I thought it was the wrong time, the Antrim game. I thought if they'd have played him for that game, but if they were going to maybe not start him and try Tim O'Mahony, it was the Galway game, because then you're in a dressing room and you're looking at the six forwards and you're saying, lads, now he's not here, we want you to stand up. And then you can look to the bench and you say, lads, you can see what we have in the bench. We have players that have done it in every different way. But I felt they lost a little bit of that, no disrespect to Antrim, but they could have held that, I think, maybe for the Galway game.
We're just out of time. Do you give Wexford any chance against Clare?
I would. I think Wexford are in the long grass now waiting for Clare. I think obviously Clare have their own issues with Rory Hayes and Duggan coming up, but Brian Lohan will, have them on point, no doubt about it. There'll be ferocious intensity going into that match again. But Wexford, there's a bit of confidence building. Their players are back fit, and waiting to see if Dio O'Keefe makes the game. He's a huge player for Wexford hurling, and we need him, and he plays very well against Clare. Clare have got one over us in the last couple of games, so I think the Wexford boys will be well up for it. I give them a good chance.
Yeah. James?
I'll call Galway and I'll call Clare.
Oh my, okay.
I think we'll have the provincial winners and runners up in the semi-finals.
Okay, well, we'll have to tune in next week to see how how that stands up. Lads, thanks very much for making the trip up to the Big Smoke to join us in studio. James, great to have you in as usual. Owen, great to spend a bit of time in your company. It's not too often I get to see you anymore. You're down on the other peninsula. Yeah, that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll be definitely back next Monday to look at the quarterfinals and how Wexford, Clare and Galway, Cork get on. Thanks very much for joining us. Slán.